Good to see you. My name's Scott. I will be muting that. Ooh. Welcome to Impact. How are you guys doing today? Thank you. Thank you very much. So I've got a question for you. Do you want God to write how many of you want God to write a new chapter in your life? How many of you guys do you want to have the kind of life that people will write books about? Right? Wouldn't that be awesome to have the kind of life that it has so much significance, so much meaning that somebody's like, I should make a movie about this life. And if that's you, the question that I want you to ask yourself is, what are you willing to do to have your life transformed? Right? Because the reality is everything comes with a cost. I always try to tell my kids this. They say, look, Daddy, it's free. Nothing's free. Everything comes with a cost. And the reality is the life that you are living right now is costing you. And the life that we often want will also cost us. And what we usually do is we look at the cost of what we want and we're like, that's too expensive, without ever looking at the cost we are currently paying for our life right now. And if you want to have an extraordinary life, you know what it's going to cost you? Your current life. That's the cost, your current life. And the question is, are you willing to give up your current life for whatever God is calling you to? That's the big question we all struggle with. God, we pray, God, give me this amazing vision, give me this something. And He tells us what it is, and we're like, I don't know if I can pay that. That's a little too much, God. And then we start negotiating. Okay, I can't really do that. What if we bargain down? Is it cool if we bargain down? So, today's topic that I'm talking about is love. Right? Our whole week is called Ignite, how to ignite your life, how to rekindle some fire, some passion. And today's specific topic is love. And I learned all the wrong things about love, mostly from my stepdad. My stepdad was a former Marine Corps drill instructor. He was suffering from PST. He didn't know it at the time. From the Korean War, he was very angry, very violent. He would beat me, slap me around, all that kind of stuff. And then afterwards, because his anger just got a hold of him, he wasn't a horrible human being. He felt remorseful and horrible about what he did. So I'd be in my room crying, and he'd come down, sit down next to me, put his arm around, apologize that he let his anger get the best of him. And we'd have this really tender moment where we made up. He didn't realize it, but he was teaching me all the wrong things about love. So what happened was, as I grew up, I had this idea that whenever I messed up, I needed to be punished in order to be lovable again. Right? And that's what his brokenness taught me. That's the brokenness that I grabbed onto. That I needed to suffer in order to be loved. To be lovable. And of course I brought that into all of my relationships, and they all went really good. Just kidding. Right? It was kind of a train wreck. Right? And if you are anything like me, you can relate. Love is one of the most amazing things that we have. It's also one of the most frustrating and painful things that we can experience. And there's all kinds of stuff that can interfere with us in terms of loving and having great relationships. Insecurities. Some of us have all kinds of insecurities. Some of us, it's addictions that interfere. Some of it is unhealthy attitudes or dysfunctional behaviors that we've picked up. And they cause your relationships to be toxic and eventually poisons them over time. Right? Every relationship I was in the past, it was just like people walked around with hazmat suits around that relationship because it was so bad. Some of us in this room, we have such high levels of toxicity in our relationships that we should have just a sign on our forehead that says, "Caution, do not enter." This is a enter at your own risk, right? Some of us, we understand our brokenness. We've been working on it for a while. We've been cleaning it up. And it's not like you're going to die from the toxicity, but it's still there, and over a long period of time, it will slowly poison the relationships. So what's the solution? How do we get this whole love thing right? That's what we're going to talk about. How do we get this whole love thing right? So let's talk about love. What is love? I want you to turn to somebody next to you, and I want you guys to come up with a definition of what love is. Ready, go.
Cookies.
All right, so what did you guys come up with? With this side of the room, what did you guys come up with? My scholars over here.
Long suffering.
Long suffering, okay.
Patience.
Okay.
Seeing and being seen.
Yeah.
Seeing and being
Knowing
seen.
and being known.
Knowing and being known, okay.
We got it over here.
Sacrifice, you got it, okay, you got it.
Love makes you feel good, and you never have to say you're sorry.
Love makes you feel good, and you never have to make you. Can you tell my wife that last part?
Baked goods.
Baked goods. Yeah. Deep affection. What do you guys? Anybody else? Unconditional. All right. Did you notice something about all of our definitions? They're all over the board. This is one of the. As I was just thinking, like, what is love? Just trying to figure out what it is, because I know I experience it. There's a certain level of ambiguity of how we use the word love and how we think of love. Right? We say we love tacos.
Yeah.
My dog and other people and my car. So let's first define it. So we're going to, in English, if you go to the English dictionary, it is a feeling of deep affection towards another. Right? It's a feeling of deep affection towards another. But then the question should be, well, what does affection mean? So affection is a fond attachment to somebody. Right? And then the next question should be, what does attachment mean? An attachment means a feeling that binds yourself to another person. You feel bound to somebody. Right? In psychology, this is called personal expansion. Right? You are expanding your sense of self all the time. Right? So like I have a pencil that I have owned for 17 years now. It is my Bible study pencil. It gets attached to my Bible. That's the only thing that it gets used for. Right? And that pencil is not just a pencil to me anymore. It ceased being just a pencil a long time ago. Right? That I have expanded my sense of self to include my pencil. Right? And you do the same thing with your house, with your rooms. That you have this like your room, your house is an extension of yourself. I've got 3 young kids and I clean, my wife and I clean, and then in 4 or 5 hours it's all messy again. And sometimes I walk into the kitchen or the living room and I see it's just cluttered, and I think to myself, this house is like a depiction of my life. Right? I don't know if you've ever thought that, but it's a representative of me. And we do that. We self-expand. We expand not just things, but people as well. The self-expansion is this idea where it's difficult for you to know where you end and the other person begin. That as you see yourself, you also see that other person as part of yourself somehow. Does that make sense? So like if you've ever lost somebody that you love, one of the things that you would say and feel is, I feel like a part of me is gone. Right? That's that self-expansion. That you begin to literally take a piece of that person and put it inside of you, and they become a part of you. That's really what love is. It's that deep affection, that deep attachment, that deep bond that you have, that you and that person are connected in some kind of meaningful way. The Greek definition is a little different. So our definition is kind of warm and fuzzy. English, it's warm, fuzzy, happy feeling, very emotional, sentimental. Greek and Hebrew, which is what the Bible was written in, is a little different. There's several different forms of the word in Greek and Hebrew, right? So there's sexual love, there's friendship love, there's parental love. But the big one that we talk about, like the most perfect of all perfect, is agape love. And agape love in Greek is considered moral goodwill, which proceeds from esteem, principle, or duty. So it's this moral goodwill, that you have goodwill towards a person that comes from esteem, principle, or duty, not, and this is the important, not attraction or charm. Right? We typically have love because I'm attracted to this person. It has nothing to do with attraction. It's this moral sense of, I esteem this person highly, so I am going to do what's in their best interest. And this kind of love is towards the undeserving, even despite disappointment or rejection. Right? If you're a parent, you know what that feels like. I love my child, even though they disappoint me and reject me. And they are, in so many ways, so often undeserving of this perfect love I'm giving them. And that's agape. Right? That my love is not dependent on how you receive it. I am loving you because I have a moral obligation as your parent to love you. And I esteem you highly, even though you're being a little brat right now. When it's talking about God's love, it's God's willful direction towards us. It involves God doing what He knows is best for us, not necessarily what we desire. Right? You see this in John, where it says, "For God so loved the world that He gave His Son." Right? What did God give? He didn't give us what we wanted, He gave us what we needed. And that's the kind of love. A love that is giving, that's not necessarily, first of all, it's not dependent on the person, how they receive it, but you give what the person needs, even if the person doesn't want what they need. Right? I'm not telling you to go stalk people just because you're like, no, she needs me in her life. That's not the kind of love. You've got the wrong kind of love going on there. In Hebrew, it's hesed. And hesed, this kind of love, which is similar to agape, actually is untranslatable. There is no true English word, right? It has been translated as loyalty. That's an odd way to translate love. Loyalty. Or steadfast love. Or unfailing love. Like when you read through the Psalms, it talks about God's unfailing love. That's the kind of love. And it's also translated as kindness. This kind of love is not an emotional response to beauty or merit or any kind of thing that the person has, but it is, once again, the same word, a moral attitude dedicated to another person's good. Whether or not the other person is lovable or worthy or responsive. Right? It has kindness in it. It has this tenderness into it. It has compassion in it. But its chief characteristic is an accepted moral obligation for another person's welfare. Right? If you're a parent, you understand that. I have a moral obligation for the other person's welfare. That's the kind of love. Right? And it doesn't matter about if it's undeserving or there's no ingratitude. It's that I have an obligation to love you in a certain kind of way. Right? In Hebrew, this word hasid is considered a covenant love. Right? We put that word on a covenant love, that I have covenanted, I have committed, almost like a marriage, to love you at this kind of level. So, you ready to dive in now that we kind of understand the basics? All right, the foundation of all love. 1 John 3:16. I'm going to be, somebody look up 1 John 3:16. Not John 3:16, 1 John 3:16. 1 John 3:16, somebody read it.
By this we know love, because he laid down his life for us, and we also ought to lay down our lives for the friend.
So, by this we know love. How do we know love? Because he laid down his life for us. Here's the big thing. You ready? The starting point for love is God. How do we know love? How do we comprehend love? Because love flows from God to us. He is the foundation. This is the foundation. You cannot pass go without this. This is the main problem. There's several problems with the idea of self-love. Right? But here's the main problem. God is the source of love. We are not. Right? And the idea of self-love, it comes from a real, genuine need that we have. But the problem with self-love, learning to love yourself, is that it's an empty well that you're drawing from. I don't know if you've ever tried it before. You feel bad about yourself. You've got a low, you beat yourself up. You've got a bad view of yourself. And so what we try to do is convince ourselves that we're lovable. Right? And that can work for a little bit, but what usually happens? Am I the only one that I go back to hating myself? Right? What happens is we'll build ourselves up to like, no, I can love myself, I'm a good person. It's almost like that one guy on Saturday Night Live that looks in the mirror. You're good enough, you're smart enough, and gosh darn it, people like you. And we give ourselves a pep talk, and it might work for a little bit, but eventually what happens? We go back to feeling bad about ourselves. And the reason why that doesn't work is because we are not the source of love. God is the source of love. And we have to start there in order to fill in that deep insecurity, that brokenness that we're trying to muster up in ourselves. It will eventually flow there, right? But we're not the beginning. God is the beginning. So let's look at this beginning, this beautiful love. Deuteronomy 7, 7 through 8. Deuteronomy 7, 7 through 8. It says, "The Lord did not set his love on you, nor choose you because you were more in number than the other people. For you were the least of all peoples." Right? So this is God telling Israel, why did I set my love upon you? And he starts off with a great pep talk. Right? These are the reasons I didn't choose you. And what is the reason he didn't choose you? I didn't choose you because you were more in number, but because you were the least of all peoples. What is he saying? There wasn't much about you to love. There were better choices. And he's basically saying you didn't have any inherent qualities that made me be like, oh my gosh, I just need to love you. And he goes on, but because the Lord loves you and because he would keep his oath, the Lord brought you out with a mighty hand. Why did God love Israel? It wasn't because they had something special, but it was because God chose to love. Right? And it's this idea that we are lovable because we are loved. Right? We're not, and we mix this one up all the time. We are not loved because we are lovable, which is what we usually try to do with other people and with God. Let me show you how lovable I am so that you can give me love. And God says that's not how it works. What it started was, I chose to love you and then you became lovable. Because I set my love on you, you are now precious. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Right? So what does this mean for us? This is one of our big issues with the Lord. What we're trying to do all the time is show him how good of a choice I am, God. I mean, like, God, look how good I am. Some of us are performance-based, and we're like, God, let me show you how lovable I am. Right? Let me, just like in my brokenness, God, what do I have to do in order to receive love from you? And we're trying to reverse engineer it. Here's the deal. Are you ready? Some of you, this is going to rub you the wrong way. It's okay. You need to hear it. Embrace your undeservingness. You are undeserving of God's love, and that's a good thing. Because it means you don't have to try and earn it. You don't have to struggle and strive for it. It's something that he gives freely. Right? I love my kids. Not because they have proven that they are worthy to receive my love. Lord knows they prove over and over how kind of unworthy they are, right? But I chose to place my love on my kids even before they were born. Before they could do anything right, anything wrong, I placed my love on them. They are lovable, not because they have some inherent quality in them that makes me look at them and be like, oh, okay, I'm going to love you. But I have placed, long before they could even screw up or do anything right or wrong, I placed my love on them, just like God has done with us. That before you could perform, God has placed his love on you. And it's not something you can earn or get taken away. 1 John 4, verse 9 through 11. 1 John 4, 9 through 11. It says, in this, the love of God was manifest towards us. What does manifest mean? Made real. Right? It came to fruition. It was shown to us. What is this love of God that was shown to us or made known to us? That God has sent his only begotten Son into the world that we might live through him. In this is love. Not that we loved God, but that God loved us. And he sent his Son to be the propitiation for our sins. This is love. Not that you love God, but what? God loved you. When we talk about love, love is not just something that God does. Love is something that God is. It's part of who he is. It flows out of him. And love is what God gives to us. Right? God has given you everything. Absolutely everything you need. And here's a great concept. God does not want anything from you. And we feel like that all the time. God doesn't want anything from you. He wants something for you. He wants to give to you. This is love, not that you're like, okay, God, I love you, but that God gave to you. And what is it that He wants from you or for you? 1 John 3:1. This is the big thing. This is the one thing God's love. This is what He wants for you. You ready? 1 John 3:1. Behold, what manner of love the Father has lavished upon us. Right? So the first word is behold. What does behold mean? We don't really like to use that anymore. Behold my wife, I have grown along, right? We don't talk like that. What does behold mean?
Check it out.
Check it out! Trip out! Look at this! This is crazy! And what is it that we're supposed to be checking out? Behold, what manner, right? What does manner mean? The way in which, the kind of love, the quality of love, the way in which He has loved, the manner of love the Father has lavished upon us. Right? So in what way did He love us? A little bit? Tiny bit? Break off pieces? Lavish. What does it mean to lavish? Like when I go to Ruth Chris, right, with the steak, just lavish the butter and I love it, right? It means over the top. It's just way more than you needed. It's over the top. You need this much, and they go this much. This is very different than what we usually think about God's love. When we think about God's love, we think that He just breaks enough. Here's a little piece for today. Good job yesterday. You earned a little bit of love. Be careful with what you do with that. Because if you screw up, I'm going to take it back. And that's usually how we view. We might not actually say it, because we're like, no, I don't do that. But that's a lot of times how we subliminally, subconsciously act towards God. You got to be careful, because he might be like, oh, I'm pulling that back. You haven't been good enough. So I'm going to take that back for you. Sorry, buddy. But what does this verse say? Behold, trip out at the kind of love that God has lavished way above, way beyond what you would even assume you could get. And what is this kind of love that God has lavished upon us? That you should be a child of God. How is that God lavishing love on you? What has He done for you? What does it mean to be a child of God? I know we throw that out all the time. Sometimes we sing songs about it. What does it mean to be a child of God? Yeah, you're in His family. What is it? So what? What's the big deal about that?
You have
So think about all the different relationships you could have with God. Think of all the relationships that oftentimes we assume we have with God. There's very much this employee-employer relationship that we sometimes think of that we have with God. Right? The schoolmaster-pupil. There's all these different kinds of slave and master. There's all these different kinds of relationships that we could have with God. Which relationship did God choose? The closest relationship ever. There is nothing greater. There is no higher level of acceptance. It is the highest and best relationship. And I know I'm not using the word father because most of you have father issues, daddy issues, right? So you just think of and some of you you have mother issues too. Think of the most perfect parent relationship, right? And if you don't have kids, it's hard to understand this concept. But God has given you a parent-child relationship where there is complete acceptance of you for your good and for your quirks. Right? My middle child, I love him to death. He needs things like a certain way. And like when we're trying to leave the house and he's like, no, we have to go slow because this needs to be like that. I'm like, ah! Right? But when I'm not like forcing my agenda, I look at his like uniqueness and it just makes me smile. It's just like, he is so interesting. He's him. And I love the fact that he is him. With all of his oddness. And all three of them have oddness. And I accept him fully for all of his oddness. And that's one of the things that God does for you. He accepts you fully. You know all those things that you're like, man, I wish I didn't. Why do I? And you beat yourself up. You know what God does? He looks and he's like, oh, I love that oddness about you. That is perfect. I love the uniqueness of you. Even the parts you don't like. He's like, oh, that's so precious. There's no one on earth like her. Not only that, but it's self-sacrificial. The parent-child relationship, it's more intense self-sacrificial when they're like newborns and young. Right? But it's self-sacrificial throughout. I remember with a newborn, basically they eat, poop, and sleep and cry. Right? They do that. And it's just, for months and months, they just become the center of everything. When they scream, everything stops. You give up sleep, you give up friends, you give up even having a good conversation with your wife. Everything gets thrown out the door. Your life just gets messed up and it's just give this thing that screams every 3 hours. Whatever it wants. I always thought it was funny. People were like, oh, I slept like a baby. You woke up screaming every 2 hours? That's a horrible night's sleep. Right? And you're just giving and giving. And you know what? I wouldn't have it any other way. Those were some of the most precious times. And now that my kids are more independent, you know what? I miss it. I miss I know I want to give. Right? And now they won't let me give. And I'm like, oh, but I want to give. That's the kind of self-sacrificing love God has for you. He has that desire to give to you. You are the apple of his eye. That's a really weird phrase, right? You're like, what does that even mean? And that comes from the Bible. The root word, this is really cool. I learned this the other day. Do you know what apple of his eye means? In the original Hebrew, it means daughter of my eye. Right? There is something special. I've got one girl. There's something special about a father looking at his daughter. Sometimes I just watch her do nothing and smile. I'm just like, oh, she's so precious. She's my angel. And that's the idea that God has towards you, that you are that special daughter, like a daughter to a father. That's how you are to him. That special place in his heart that you are. If you're a guy, just go with it. You are his princess. Romans 8:35 through 39. Romans 8:35 through 39 says, "Who shall separate us from the love of Christ?" This extraordinary, extravagant love that God has for us. Who's going to separate from us? Shall tribulation or distress or persecution or famine or nakedness or peril or sword, is any of the bad things, the horrible things in life, able to separate you from the love of Christ? For I am persuaded that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor principalities, nor powers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor height, nor depth, nor any other created thing shall be able to separate us from the love of God, which is in Christ Jesus our Lord. Nothing can separate you from this extraordinary love God has for you. Death can't separate you. Life cannot separate you. Angels, principalities, powers, there's nothing in heaven, on earth, or in hell that can separate you from the love of God. Things present, things that are going on right now in your life, don't have the capacity to separate you. Things to come, the future. There's nothing that's going to happen in the future that has the ability to separate you from the love of God. There's no height or depth, no matter how good life gets or how crappy it gets. Right? The vicissitudes of life, the ups and downs in life. Life can be crushing at times. I've gone through a couple seasons of those myself. There's going to be, guess what? There's more to come. That's what I'm really excited about. Right? But no matter how good life is or how bad life is, it doesn't separate us from the love of God. And it says, nor any other created thing. There is nothing. And you know what one of those created things are? You. You don't even have the capacity to separate you from the love of God. Right? Nothing can separate. God has bestowed this love on you, and it doesn't matter if you're great gratitude for it or not. He has placed that love on you. His love remains, just like kids. I don't want my kids to grow older because I hear all these horrible stories about how they break your heart. And they make all these bad choices, and you're like, ah! Guess what? Love still remains. And even as we make bad choices with our lives, guess what? Love still remains. So God's love is the foundation. Right? From that foundation, we need to build something else, which is our love for God. Deuteronomy 6:4, it's the Shema, known as the Shema, which just means hear. It's what the Israelites, it's like their go-to verse. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. Jesus reiterates and basically says the same thing. They say, hey, what are the greatest commandments in the world? What should I do with my life? And he says in Mark 12, verses 29 through 30, the first of all the commandments is this. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one, and you shall love the Lord God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. This is the first commandment. The second commandment is like it. We'll get into that in a second. Right? But this is what it says. So Jesus says we should love the Lord God with all of our heart. What is your heart for? What do you do with your heart?
Pump blood in it?
No, it's a different kind. It's the seat of your desires, your feelings, your affections kind of thing. Right? So you should be loving God with all of your emotions. Right? And then we should also love God with all of our soul. And if you do a word study, these words, they have a lot of overlap. Right? So basically Jesus is saying that you should love God with all of who you are, but we're going to break it down a tiny bit. So your soul is basically your volition, your will, your choices. Right? That as much as you can muster, your volition, your choices, love God with. And then we should love God with all of our mind. Your mind here would be what? Your thoughts, your reasoning, your understanding, your intellect. That our thoughts, our minds, our daydreams, all of our things that go on, the scatteredness, all of it, we should be loving God with. And then all of our strength. What does strength mean? It's not like working out, although I have been. You can tell. It's ability. It's all of your ability. Your strength has to do with your ability. Right? It has to do with your physical ability. It actually has to do with your mental ability as well. Your emotional ability. This is where the overlap comes over. And also even your resources. That as you have ability, if there's an ability someplace in your life, it should be used to love God. And this basically means all of who you are, your whole being, you should be loving God. Right? What does that actually look like? It's a great question. Loving God, you have to realize, first of all, that we can't put the cart before the horse. Loving God is a response to His great love for us. And if we don't understand this, loving God becomes an obligation, task-focused, work-based oriented, right? Where you're trying to prove or earn something. And that's the worst way. It's not an obligation, but it's an outflow of an understanding of the extravagance of God's love for us and how free it is. And He's just looking for us to be little kids in His arms. Right? Just like the outflow of a well-loved child is to love their parents. Just be like, oh, I love you so much. And that's the natural outflow. When we are well-loved, guess what we will do? We will love God well as well. Now, often, this loving God with our minds and our choices and our emotions and all of our strength and resources, a lot of times we need to learn how to do this from other people. Because we have been shown bad ways all the time from parents and siblings, and relationally here's the deal with God. We were created with a vertical and horizontal relationships. And they interplay with each other. Right? So just like my relationship with my stepdad affected how I viewed my relationship with God, it's vice versa. Right? So how I view God and interact with Him will help my relationships, and how my relationships work will also affect my relationship with God. So unless you have an amazing relationships and you have cleared out all of your junk in life, maybe one of you done that, please come talk to me and tell me how to do it. Right? We need to be shown a better way. There's this, if you're a PETA member, don't get too mad. There's an experiment that they did with dogs. And it sounds harsh, but try to hear the moral of the story, not the... So they took dogs, put it in metal cages. They gave it low level. What kind of level? Low level electricity. So their paws would twitch. Uncomfortable, but not painful. Okay? Uncomfortable, but not painful. Okay? Now, and guess what the dogs did? No, they just ran. They ran out the door. They're like, ooh, what is that? They bolted out the cage. Then they took the dogs and closed the cage. And shocked them. Until they just got used to it. Then they opened the door and shocked them. Guess what the dogs did? Stayed. They just stayed there. And that's what a lot of our life is like. We're like, this really stinks. I wish life wouldn't be so bad. I wish my relationships didn't have to be so bad. I wish there was but this is my lot in life. Have you ever thought about that? I say that to myself sometimes. I'm like, this is just how life is going to be. I just need to learn to suffer through this because this is the best that it gets. Right? I just need to learn to manage this level of brokenness in my life. And we're like the dogs in the cage, just twitching. Like, this is just how it is. But then they did something extraordinary. They took a dog that had never had the experiment done before. They put it in the same cage with the dog that had been there. They turned the electricity on. That new dog bolted. Guess what the second dog did? It ran too. It was like, I don't have to stay here? Right? And sometimes what we need is to be shown a better way. It's kind of like what in 1 Corinthians 11:1, Paul says. He says, imitate me as I imitate Christ. We need to see people how they love God with their finances or in their relationships or all those things, to be able to be like, I didn't even know that was an option. I didn't know I could do that. I need to start doing that. Right? Sometimes we're so much in a box, we're unable to even think about alternatives to how we're living our lives until we are shown a way. And some of us, we need to be shown a new way of loving God. So the foundation is accepting God's love for us. And from that, we begin to love God with all of who we are. And then from there, it's our love for others. The love flows out. Leviticus 19:18. It's rare when you have a verse from Leviticus and somebody's like, yeah. Numbers. You got anything from Numbers? It says, you shall not take vengeance nor bear any grudge against the children of your people. Right? So the first thing is don't take vengeance against people. Don't bear grudges. Don't be a jerk towards people, is basically. But, and this is the contrast, so instead of being vengeful towards people, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. For I am the Lord. This idea of loving your neighbor as yourself. Conceptually, we sometimes think that in order to love your neighbor as yourself, that I need to love myself first. That's not what it's talking about here. Loving your neighbor as yourself is being contrasted to don't be vengeful towards people. Does that make sense? Don't be vengeful towards people, but love your neighbor as yourself. What does that mean in that context? Don't be a jerk. It's basically the golden rule. Right? Matthew 7:12. Therefore, whatever you want people to do to you, do to them. That's the golden rule. That's what it means to love your neighbor as yourself. This is the rule this is like the only rule that we ever address in my family with kids. Like, do you like it when your sister hits you? So, what should we not do? But you don't understand. I do. I do understand. And it's loving your neighbor is treating people the way you want to be treated. You don't want people to be vengeful towards you. You should not be vengeful towards people. Romans 8:13, verses 8 through 10. Romans 13, 8 through 10. Owe no one anything except to love one another. The only thing we owe to other people is to love them. For he who loves another has fulfilled the law. The whole law, everything that God's like, the huge, all those commandments with all those laws and the rules, you do two things, you fulfill them all. You know what? Love God with everything you got and love other people. All those rules, all those laws that we sometimes get tripped up on and think it's super complicated, it's just like well, it's unloving if I do this with my kids. It's unloving if you do this. It's unloving if you do that. It's unloving if you do that. You should probably do this next time. You should probably do this next time. And the whole point is just love your brothers and sisters. And that's the whole point of the commandments, is to love God with everything you have and love other people. You do that and you have fulfilled it all. For the commandments, listen to it. It says, for the commandments, don't commit adultery, don't murder, don't steal, don't bear false witness, don't covet. If there's any other commandment, they're all summed up in this. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. And it goes on, he says, love does no harm to a neighbor. That's why it's the fulfillment. Committing adultery. Why is committing adultery wrong? Because it harms. It harms your spouse. It harms the person that you're committing. It harms their kids. It causes harm. Why is stealing wrong? Because it harms. Why is bearing false witness wrong? Because it harms. Love is about loving your neighbor as yourself. Is just simply, you don't want people to come and screw you over. You shouldn't be doing the same to them. That how you want to be treated, you should be extending that to other people. Philippians 2, verses 3 to 4 says it best, I think. It says, let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit, but in lowliness of mind, let each of you esteem others better than themselves. And here's the part. Let each of you look out not only for your own interest, but also the interest of others. Right? The Bible's not teaching us to hate yourself and not have any concept of self and don't do what's good for yourself. If you want to be a well-functioning adult, you need to take care of yourself. You need to take care of your business. You need to be on top of stuff. Loving your other people is let you don't just look out for your own interest, but look out for the interest of others. Right? Expand. It's basically loving others is expanding your focus on your interests to involve the interests of the people around you. That it's not just a pursuit of my own interest, but I need to start thinking about the interests of the people around me as well. It's a self-sacrificial love. Just as God has given us what we need, not what we deserve, we are called to do the same thing with other people. Right? This is where Jesus comes and says all kinds of hard stuff that I don't like. Pray for your enemies. Stupidest thing. Pray for your enemies. Right? Jesus actually says, what good? You love the people that love you back. Yeah. There's no prize in that. So the most broken people on earth do that. That's not like pat myself on the back. I love my wife. I'm so awesome. But love beyond that. 1 John 3:16, 18, we started with this, we'll also end with this. By this we know love, because he laid down his life for us. And the second part of that verse, we also ought to lay our lives down for other people. But whoever has his world goods and sees his brother in needs and shuts up his heart from him, how does the love of God abide there? If you've got a capacity to help somebody, right? It's not like you have to sell everything to help people, but if you have the capacity to help somebody and you don't, how does the love of God abide? It's like there's no love in that. My little children, let us not love in word or in tongue, but in deed and in truth. Right? A lot of times we, as Christians, we talk a lot about love, we sing about love, but we need to go beyond just talking and singing and actually showing it. And expanding a concern for self, which is there's an appropriate amount of concern for self, but expanding it out to a concern for those around us. There's a lost and hurting world that desperately needs God's love. So the conclusion. How to experience and express love in your relationships. Number one, it starts with God's love. If you don't get this, none of the other things will make sense. If this one is not this has to be the foundation. If you start with your love for God or your love for other people, it's not going to end well. Because it's going to be all in you and your strength and your effort, and your own junk is going to come out. Right? This is what most of us need help with. It's what cleans out the toxicity from our lives and from our relationships. Is understanding and accepting God's love for us. That's the game changer. Right? Those of us that struggle with the low self-esteem, the key to break free of that is accepting God's love for me. Just like, I don't understand. Sometimes it's just by faith. I don't understand it. It doesn't make sense. I'm just going to, by faith, just lay down all my junk and say, I choose to believe this and receive this instead. And then, of course, responding to God's amazing love is the next one. Not out of obligation, but adoration. Right? This frees you from the works-based mentality. Trying to earn something from God. Trying to get God's love. Right? Some of us in this room, you're on the hamster wheel of works. Right? And typically when we're on the hamster wheel of works, it's because we're trying to prove something about ourselves to ourselves, or trying to show God that we were a good choice. Right? And the reality is that our love for God is just a natural outflow of being loved. And that's where it should come from. And then, of course, extending God's love towards others. It's a supernatural kind of love. That laying down your life doesn't happen just because you're like, that's the right thing to do. I've tried it. It doesn't work. Or at least it doesn't work for long. That it needs to be a supernatural outflow. It comes from God's love. God loves me in such an extraordinary way that all my needs are met from Him, that it's easy to give to people. Right? When we go through life with a, what is it called? Scarcity mindset. It's very easy to be like, I'm not sure I can, giving people, it takes too much from me. But when we understand how extraordinary and extravagant God's love is, it's easy to love people that require a lot from us. I am not advocating, by the way, for dysfunctional relationships with that statement. If you're in a bad relationship or you're getting abused, that does not apply to you. You should come talk to me and I'll tell you what does. Anyways, so what would change in your life if all of those things came together? Think about your life. If you finally accepted how extraordinary God's love for you, how would that change? If you were able to just give God love, not out of obligation, but just as a response, what would change? What about your relationships? If you weren't approaching your relationships from a need-based standpoint and just had enough to give, what would change in your relationships? So we're at Impact, so I'm going to give you a call to action here. Impact is a perfect place to have those truths sink deep into your life. And some of you are here for free lunch. And that's okay, there's lunch. There's lunch. Right? Some of you are here for free lunch, but some of you God has brought here because there's things in your life that you want Him to change and He wants to change. Right? If that's you, then I want to encourage you to take a step of faith. Sign up, fill out the application, see what God, it may be that God has this for you and He wants to do something extraordinary in your life. Or it may be that you're just here for free lunch. That's okay too. But I want to encourage you, if there's a tug, if there's a desire for more, your step of faith is just filling out an application and saying, all right, God, let's see what you want. All right, let's take a break. Go, usually we have stuff downstairs. It's all right there. There's bathrooms downstairs as well as upstairs if you want.